Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Ben Kinsley is joining me tonight as co-host. Ben, how are you?
Good. How are you, Pat?
Good. Thank you very much. Pretty soon this is all going to be over and we're going to be able to see each other in person. I've been assured of this.
Soon enough.
Yeah, soon enough. And our very special guest tonight is Mary Evslin. She and her husband, Tom, founded a new nonprofit called Broadband Equity Now Coalition. So I think your ears should pick up on that title. Welcome, Mary. We're glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you, Pat and Ben. I'm honored to be here.
Now, this is quite the topic. I've been covering some of the committees for Campaign for Vermont, and every other word is broadband. So, and that last mile discussion we've always had. So could you take a few minutes to talk a little bit about yourself so our audience gets up to speed here?
Well, I'm not a real Vermonter. I only moved here in 1970.
Oh, baby.
I know that doesn't really count. And my husband and I have run many high-tech companies that we start, most of them. Some of them are successful. Most of them are terribly not successful. But they always, Tom has a great ability to see trends before most people do. So we've sort of split up all the jobs. He sees the trend coming. He's often ahead of the time so early that it doesn't work. And then he hands the idea over to me, and I have to make it function. I have to get the incorporated, hire the people, write the employee manual, get the insurance, do the advertising, do the PR, until it gets to the point where it's a real viable company and we can peel off those layers and hire professionals to do it. So I've been in the high-tech industry since the 70s, and our last business was a transporting of natural gas business, which is in Milton, and we are able to provide, yes, it's a fossil fuel, but it's the cheapest and the cleanest of them all. And we provide heat to facilities that aren't lucky enough to be built on a pipeline before whatever else is going to, in fact, be next. So, for example, we provide heat to Ticonderoga paper mill, to most of the hospitals, to paper mills in New Hampshire, in Maine, processing companies in New York, a yogurt making company. So companies that have to compete with others who are lucky enough to be on the pipeline. So I've been with technology for a long enough time not to be a programmer, but to try to sell it and to try to realize how it benefits people's lives, because that's how you sell stuff. So I'm here to try to answer any questions you've got about the new activity that we're strongly encouraging people to contact their legislators about, because, as you say, broadband is being talked about everywhere, but
it's
not. And we always thought it was important, but with the pandemic, it's ratcheted up the need for access, because if we're going to build this state better than it was, not just back to the old normal, but better, almost everything has got that as the platform underneath it. If you want telemedicine to make our medical industry more efficient and less expensive, if you're going to improve the quality of education, there's something called upside down education. Are you familiar with that term?
No, I've not heard that. What is that?
Well, when I went to school, the nuns lectured us for the day, and then we would go home and we would write it down 15 times or 150 times to try to memorize it and come back to school knowing it. This is just the opposite. With the need for such a depth of information and quality of teaching, hardly any small elementary school, much less a college, can afford to hire the world's best expert on Middle Eastern history or Mandarin or physics, or all those things that a lot of the children are going to want to know at least something about. And the way that you do that is you go on the Khan Academy, or you go on the internet. At home, the kid watches the world's expert in that talk. And when they come to school, the teacher is more of a mentor than a lecturer. So the teacher says, okay, let's debate that point. Ben thinks he heard this and you think you heard that. Which is right? And let's write a poem about it, or a story about it, or let's have a debate about it, or the way. That's what makes it I own the information. That's what makes it sink into me. So you got to have the internet for that kind of education. You got to have the internet for the health, the education. If I'm going to be a new worker in a company, I would bet you that at least part of my week is going to be off online doing something at home. And you just can't say to low income people, well, you got to wait 5 years. Don't worry. We've been telling them that for about a decade. Just wait 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And you know what? Now it's kind of immoral, I think, to say that.
Well, I have heard some amazing stories about productivity in this new world, about workers working twice as hard at home than perhaps in the office where you're distracted by gabbing or the water cooler or whatever. I've heard some amazing percentages.
Yeah, I have people complain about having to be home with their kids, and then about 2 minutes later saying, I hope that my children remember this year and a half like I do, because I've had the opportunity to get to know them as people and spend time with them that I never would have been able to do before.
Exactly. Well, I mentioned right in the beginning of the show the phrase "the last mile," and just to get people caught up before we get into talking about what you and Tom are doing, could you summarize for us where Vermont is at the moment and why, in heaven's name, it has taken us so long to close the last mile gap?
Okay, can I do a quick explanation of what the last mile is?
Sure, please.
Is that all right?
Yes, of course.
I tend to think of the internet as many other utilities, like the gas utility, like the roads, like the electrical utilities. There are, outside of New York and New Jersey, there are roads that are 8 lanes going in either direction, 90 miles an hour. That's the power industry has a transmission cables that if you touched it, you'd fry. If a river is little and goes into a big one, into the Mississippi, the internet's the same way. There's a big internet super duper highway that goes from New York to Montreal to San Francisco to somewhere else, and then there are little cuts off of it that go to Oklahoma City and that go to Springfield and then it gets to Stowe eventually, and then it goes from the central switch in Stowe to up Stowe Hollow where I live, and then over to my driveway. And each of those have their own different connectivity speeds and challenges and problems. So if it comes speeding down the highway, speeds down to Stowe, and everybody in Stowe is on playing games and streaming videos at 5:30 at night, that's the traffic jam. And everything beyond it is going to be slow as a result of that traffic jam. Am I making any sense?
Yes, no, absolutely.
So when you think of speed and access and quality, it's not just the wire or the wireless or whatever going to my house. It's whatever happens on that highway back to the interstate. So the last mile is kind of like the road right before my house. If I lived at the end of my road, all the way halfway up, Mount Mansfield, or Worcester Range, and that is what we have had as a goal for a very long time. And when I was the chair of the VTA in its very first days, that's the Vermont Telecommunications Authority. We had the dream, naive in retrospect dream, that we could ask all the carriers to be really nice guys and just go further out. Well, that was like pushing a wet noodle, right? That didn't work very well. Because they have their companies that will get sued if they don't do things to the benefit of their shareholders. Their job is not to be charitable. It's too bad that that's the way it works, but that's pretty much the way it works. So they have, and I may be wrong with these specific numbers because they may have changed, but pretty much they say we will go out another mile if we can sign up 6 customers or 8 customers, whatever their rule is. They've worked out in their business plan. In order to do that, you probably have to have 10 houses in that mile, because one of them is going to be a millennial who only uses his or her phone. Somebody else is going to be 95 years old and doesn't want to learn how to use that dumb thing anyway. And there's going to be several low-income people who just simply can't afford it. And then you've got middle-class and upper-class people. So that's what the 6 is that sign up. And the provider had to take the wire or the wireless or some kind of cable or fiber all the way down the road past the houses that are paying them nothing.
Mm.
including the one to be able to make enough of a margin to be able to afford to run their business. And they haven't been paying any attention to those who aren't connecting to them, which I would argue as a lifelong marketing and PR person, that's anybody that you walk by is a potential customer and they're being ignored. So I think we aren't at the last mile because we didn't have gobs of money like we do now, and because we were depending on the largesse of the big phone companies, and we were not understanding how to motivate them. And to be quite honest with you, almost nothing Vermont can do will motivate a company as large as Comcast to change their rules. We're just not big enough to have that much clout. It's not that they're bad guys necessarily. That's just not the way things work. And we thought we could do that. But this time is different. This time we have so much money, and the need is greater than it was before, and it's perceived as being greater.
Right.
It was always, but it wasn't understood necessarily that way. So a lot of good people, including myself, made a mess. Did not provide what we said we would provide because we just really didn't know how. Another small thing that plays into it is that the big carriers buy equipment and design the towers and whatever the generator that's at the base of the cell tower. All their equipment is, the way that they save money is it's pretty much all standardized. It's the same thing they're going to plunk outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, as they're going to plunk in Orange County. And we're saying to them, we don't need that kind of infrastructure. We don't have that many people driving by using the mobile phone network or using the internet. We need to have it for the people that are there, but there aren't masses of people at traffic jam time that would be on your system. So why don't you design something that's half the cost that you can bring out to rural areas and still make some money on? But that, again, we did not have enough influence to hammer the story home. I mean, we're hoping to even find, like, what do they do in Nigeria? What do they do in the boonies of Peru? Somebody's, there has to be, we would fit into that category just because we don't have very many people. But it didn't work. So I don't know if that's sort of a long explanation.
Oh, yes. Well, as I tell my daughter, it always comes down to money, right?
Well,
when you
have
to make a profit.
Level of economics at play, right?
Yeah, right. They're in it to make money. That's what they're there for. Right. Well, and to provide a service. But anyway, we've got a lot of people that kills me here in Berlin. We're right between Montpelier and Barry City that can't get reached. They don't have broadband because they're on top of one of our mountains, and there are not those 10 people between the house on top and the street below. It's pretty sad.
Well, and it's not just a problem for running the cable, it's also a problem for maintaining the cable, right? So even if the state stepped in and said, we're going to subsidize 80% of the construction costs, which is phenomenally high amount, but even if the state stepped in and is like, it's important enough for us to subsidize 80% of the construction costs, depending on how far out that person is, the telecommunication company may not even be able to maintain that cable because of the cost of service doesn't cover it.
Right, and there's also geography or geology. So let's say I'm on a bald mountaintop. You're not going to be able to put a pole up there or dig a trench for the cable or anything. You're going to have to lay it along the top of the rock, which is not a good idea because some animal will eat it. So I think we are leading a little bit to a point that I was hoping to make later on, which is in my mind, there's no one technology to solve these problems. If you are in a place that's a valley with really, like, what is it, Route 7 that goes through by Waitsfield?
Oh, right.
The time, you can't, you can't put wireless there really because a lot of it is line of sight, and there's all those curves in that road in that little valley. You can't see things to the left and right because there's huge mountains of granite on either side. So the technology that you use there is very different than the technology. I have we use a WISP, which is a wireless internet service provider here at our house. And by the way, I'm on Starlink right now with Tom doing a video in the other room.
Oh, excellent.
But the WISP that we use has an antenna up on the WCAX tower on Mount Mansfield, and we have a little dish on our house that can see it. So I believe that part of the answer is being technology agnostic. There are places where one works, where better with the terrain and the number of trees. For example, if you wanted to use a satellite dish and you were living right in the middle of a forest, there's too many trees around you to be able to use that. Same thing for the WISP. There's too many trees for that one. You got to either cut down the trees or pay $10,000 to bring a fiber up your driveway. But so it's not only the economics that Ben was talking about, but it's also the physical layout of the land, I think, that dictates where some of these things are going to go. And it gets very hard to get to the end of the road and very expensive to get to the end of the road, unless you were to, there's new things coming like 5G from T-Mobile, which is currently only in Burlington, but that's the new phone network, and they're going to be offering broadband with a no cap on the amount when they get 5G here, and I don't know when that will be, but it's going to take 5, 6, 7, whatever years to get fiber. So kind of a race as to who gets there first. And today you could plop down a satellite dish too, if you wanted to, at the end of the road, which I would argue makes it easier for the other providers to say, phew, I don't have to go all the way to the end of the road.
Right.
Like I can plop down somebody's satellite dish for $600 and get over with it for a while.
Right. Not spend the $10,000 to get to the end of that, 2-mile driveway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hardly any of will go down the driveway without you paying. They'll go like maybe a football field or less. But if you have a really long driveway, you have to pay yourself on all the providers.
Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the things we want to, we'll come back to technology, I think, later, talk about maybe some of the pros and cons of the different technologies. But so you and Tom formed this new nonprofit called Broadband Equity Now Coalition. What is the goal of that new nonprofit? What are you trying to do, and what problem are you trying to solve?
It's a 501c4, which means it can lobby, and its unique only goal is to, in this discussion of all this gobs of money coming for broadband, I think it's 253 million, isn't it, Ben? Something like that.
Yeah, it's right around there, and plus another 20 million from the state.
Plus there's FCC money coming, plus there's the new infrastructure bill coming, which is supposed to have some in it too. So, I mean, it is a huge amount of money.
Yeah,
and everybody's talking about what kind of technology they're going to use and where they're going to go and all those things that have to be decided, whose poles they're going to be on and not. Meanwhile, almost nobody's talking about people. And almost nobody's they're talking about access, but not affordability. So it costs, $3,000 $300 maybe to connect, for me as a consumer to connect. If I'm a low-income single mother of 3, and I work at Hannaford's, and I'm a little bit down and I'm awfully tired and I just don't get all this stuff. And I certainly don't have a discretionary monthly $300 to plunk down one month. And most of the ISPs charge somewhere between 50 and 120 a month for your access. That's also a huge chunk. I hear stories about people, women or families buying their kid a Game Boy rather than an internet connection and a computer because they care enough about their child that they want them to be like all the other kids. And they personally go without themselves. And so the mom and the dad are trying to use the keyboard on the Game Boy at night to access their email at work or something like that. There are lots of people, librarians tell us that at night there are cars, like 10 cars lined up in front of the library where there's a hotspot. And that's where the mom and dad and the kids are uploading the mail that they accumulated in their outbox all day long. And the kids are handing in their homework. And sometimes for hours, the same family is sitting there in their car in the cold. It's despicable, I think, that we're letting that happen. So what we're saying to the legislature is, please, when you're thinking about all this infrastructure and all this building and all this stuff, think about the affordability issue for low-income families. And Or do you want to hear the details of the plan, Ben, or?
Yes.
Sure. I have a quick comment that kind of contextualizes this a little bit, because we've heard, Campaign for Vermont has been following a lot of the testimony in the legislature, and this sort of theme is starting to emerge from local internet service providers. Franklin Telecom is a good example of this. They've consistently told legislators that what's happening in their service area is they're having a hard time recouping the cost of build out, because they run a fiber cable up a road, and half the people that get service sign up for a level of service that they could have gotten on a copper cable, for example. And because they don't want to pay the highest rate for the fastest service, and that makes the economics of it dicey, because if not everyone is signing up for for reasonably fast speeds that justify the cost of fiber, that's a problem. And kind of maybe questions our strategy a little bit.
Yes, it's a problem. I think on a couple levels, and I don't want to distract into the discussion of what kind of technology should be used or not, but in most businesses, you don't outprice your product so that your potential customers can't afford it.
Right.
Which means that maybe your cost of goods has to be lowered, or your service quality has maybe even you have to have a lousy product. If that, and that's not a good, not an ideal answer, but that's what companies do when they have a product that they design that's more expensive than their customer base can pay for. So I think it's a serious problem for the providers, for the families, and I don't know the answer to it. If your customers don't need or want a higher speed, then maybe you wait to put it in until they do.
Right.
I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's a business question, not a technology question, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, you were mentioning a plan that you were putting forward on maybe how to spend this money. I know that Tom and Randy Brock, Senator Brock, they had a conference, a Zoom conference, and Tom was talking about this $27 million that they're recommending they've got a 3-part program that they'd like to see that money spent from the American Rescue Plan Act, and to get this going.
They did, and they are still supporting. We're all still supporting it.
That's great.
The idea is, well, there are varying numbers. It's very hard to tell where there are people who are connected at all, or connected adequately, or can afford it. Because Ben, your question about choosing not to use copper wire might not be a technology decision. It might be a financial decision. They can't afford any more than that. Not that they're choosing that.
Right.
So anyway, there are in Matt Dunn's emergency telecom report that he did. There are varying amounts. There's 60 or 70,000 people who aren't connected or aren't connected properly. Is this? I know that those are the kind of figures that. And so we picked randomly 50,000 people that we would try to address in 2 years. And we're working with the community action agencies and the state agencies.
Oh, great.
The definition of what low income is. And we certainly don't want to make up a new definition. So it's going to be something like school lunch, free school lunch, people. So how do you low income for them? We're in the process of not answering that question for what we hope will be the future, but actually what we're trying to do is make this decision for the legislature shovel ready, have thought out the processes and the procedures and then the players and the connections, and say, here, if you can give us some money, we could have it up by August 1st. Not that it wouldn't stay that way necessarily, but it would be a good beta test. It would be to get the service going and then tweak it. The community action agencies are willing to be the interface, the people facing. We're talking to the Department of Public Service. they currently own all the maps and all the speed rates and all the quality and all the relation with the ISPs. And there would, we're hoping that we can plunk some extra bodies in their department to answer for. So if the community action people got, well, let me back up a little bit more. 211 is offered to take some of the incoming calls, and we're hoping other social agencies will. You put the person in a database. These people have to be walked through this process and informed and helped. You can't say scan the, go on the internet, Google how to get access to the internet, download the form, fill out your personal financial statement, scan it, and send it back to us, and then we'll help you. That's not the proper way to do it. Oh. There's too much money that's come into the state that has not been used because nobody's applied for it, because nobody knows how to apply for it or have anybody hold their hands while they're doing it. So we're planning on doing that. And once the people get signed up, depending on what they need, we're guessing that 25% of the people of the 50,000 actually have some internet access available to them. They either can't afford it or they don't know that it's there. And a lot of that is Comcast, actually. And Comcast, believe it or not, a lot of people don't like Comcast for various reasons, but Comcast has a low-income plan for $9.98 a month, and they sell $150 computers.
Yeah,
that's
they have some great affordability programs.
Internet essentials. That's a pretty darn. I mean, it's got to take them that much money to process the payment every month. It's a very generous plan. And according to Matt Dunn's study, 10% of the people eligible are taking advantage of it. So if we can identify the people who are on the Comcast network and do community outreach to them by people who already trust ministers, community action people, home health nurses, VA counselors, and then help them fill out the proper forms and get them on that. That takes care of a whole lot of these people. And Comcast I'm not selling Comcast. Any carrier who has a low income plan, we would do the same thing with. That's kind of the low hanging fruit. And most of those Comcast and Consolidated and those guys who have a low income plan, because of, you asked me before about getting to the end of the road, they're in the towns. They're not out in the country and at the end of the road. So most of these people live in Scotland, in Springfield, in Bennington, and Brattleboro, and in Burlington area. So what we would, for the other people that are not already, or for those people that weren't on Comcast, so they're in an area where there is internet access but not affordable, we would pay. Ideally, this fund would pay for the whole setup cost, which is maybe my router, my wires, and the $200 or $150 that's the connection fee. That's a one-time payment. And then pay the monthly payment for up to 2 years, depending on when they sign up in the program, because it's going to stop at the end of 2023. They would have to pay $25 every month, and the fund would pay the difference between the list price of an acceptable speed and that $25. Am I making sense still? You still with me?
Yes, this is very exciting. I'm getting all charged up listening to you. This is great.
And those same companies, we assume, are going to be asking for some of the $250 million to build out their networks. And so we're suggesting that why should they get that money with no strings attached to it? Why shouldn't we say, if you want to take some of this money, you've got to eventually, by the end of 2023, have your own low income plan of $25 or under. So the family is paying $25, sort of like a copay to the federal money in the beginning. The same $25 is being spent. They don't care what it's called internally. It will be a low income plan that the ISP will be providing ongoing. That's how we sunset the answer to the question of this is supposed to be one-time money. So we're solving a problem, we hope, with one-time money, not building something with one-time money, so that all the ISPs take advantage of they should have some margin that they didn't expect before, because they didn't know that the power companies were going to pay them $2,000 for every connection. Green Mountain Power is going to give them anybody in their district a $2,000 credit because they want the access to the internet to the houses so that they can talk to them and do smart metering and all that kind of stuff. Also, they're going to have the full price of the connection fee paid for, and for potentially, if the family is the first or second one to sign up, 2 years worth of full rate paid, plus they're going to get capital at no interest.
Wow.
So it doesn't seem, it seems to be not acceptable to some of the ISPs, but we're hoping it's just because they haven't gotten their head around how the difference that all that money with all that capital money without interest is going to, how much better that's going to make their business plan.
So that really comes down to then, that really comes down to, do they think they can maintain that infrastructure? Because they're almost getting it for free.
The new infrastructure, yeah, they do. Yeah. Well, most of them have a fair amount of debt. I mean, those that are in business already have a fair amount of old-fashioned debt on their legacy network that they still have to worry about.
Right.
And yes, they have to maintain it. And what they don't, I'm sure they're thinking of, but probably what most consumers aren't thinking of, is that there's no such thing as a technology, and as far as I've ever seen, that's future-proof. Even whether you have a wireless network or a cable network or a fiber network or a G5 network, it's going to be G6. If Elon Musk has a satellite called Starlink, I know that, like, what's his name, Lord Branson, the Virgin Airlines guy, he's designing one too. So his is probably going to be a little bit bigger. And I heard that the Google guy is designing one. So that one will probably be a little better. And if I'm a WISP, I always have to have a bigger radio transmitter. And if I'm a fiber guy, I have to always have they all, as you say, then have to be maintained. They have, not just because a tree falls on it, but because whatever technology they're using for their substation or their booster or their radios or transmitters, like your computer, you got to replace it every 5 years.
Yep.
But this is such an opportunity for Vermonters. I mean, if they're willing to learn and take advantage of it and get involved, I mean, a lot of things open up to them for their success and for their families. This is really great. What is the legislature? What is their response? If you or Tom have been up to the legislature, what are they saying? Are they perking up a little?
Senator Brock is leading the effort.
Right.
And I heard one of you just said you're beginning to hear at the State House a little bit about the discussion of affordability.
Yes, exactly. That's a big issue.
That's all we're trying to do, is get people to get on the phone or write their legislators and say, whether they do it exactly the way we're suggesting really doesn't matter. And we're not going to run it. We're going to go away either if it's not funded. If it is funded, then we're going to still go away because it will be taken over by the community action agencies and the people that are the experts in that kind of stuff. But so if people were writing their legislators, they should just say, don't forget the people and affordability, because that's the cause, not Broadband Equity Now.
Right. So when you were talking about broadband core in some of the articles, is that this group of the CAP agencies, the Sue Minters and those people that you're going to train them to go out and do wondrous things?
Yes. But that's what the CAP agencies are so perfect with it, because they're already talking to them about weatherization and about food shelf stuff and about they give them assistance filing their taxes.
Yeah.
They do personal financial training, and we're hoping that we can give this broadband core the community action agencies and I'm sorry, CCV and the United Way with their Work Purchase program are putting together training for these people, and some of it is personal financial training to come up with the $25. So there's pretty easy conversation. Like, if you've got 4 mobile phones in your house, do you have a family plan? If you have 4 mobile homes in your house, do you really need the landline? If you're going to get broadband, do you really need your HughesNet satellite for TV? So there are you can do some personal financial planning using your communication devices as the example, rather than saving up for a new car or fixing your roof or something like that.
Yeah,
So
and the cap agencies work directly with these people. So you're right about the trust and knowing them and understanding their situation and how to help them. That's a great synergy. It's great.
We think it is too, and
Yeah,
and we're
awesome.
thrilled that they're willing to step up and provide this service for their clients. So there are three groups. The 3 points that you said is pay for the setup, the connection, the one-time connection, pay for the ongoing monthly thing, provide the soft skills around it for the broadband core to actually get them through the whole process, and then the requiring the ISPs who take the capital from the AARP money, AARPA money,
Yes, right.
to have their own low-income plan.
Excellent.
So we mentioned this earlier, but there are somewhere between 60 and 70,000 Vermont households, and that's an important distinction to make. We're talking households, not actual Vermonters. The number of Vermonters is higher than that because you typically have more than 2 people per household that are not connected currently to high-speed internet. And high-speed internet, in this case, under the state's definition, is 25 megabytes per second or faster download speed. So, given, I mean, the federal funds coming in have really allowed us to accelerate and think of a scope that's much larger than we've ever thought of before. Still, there were funds that came in last year. Those funds had a time limit on them. They had to be spent by the end of the year, end of 2020. So there's a little bit of a scramble to get those funds out the door, get projects funded. So really, only projects that were already shovel ready were able to capitalize on that. And a lot of these projects that were WISPs, like you talked about earlier, those wireless internet providers, they're using 4G technology that's likely to be upgraded to 5G here in the near future. And then the other, and then the rest of it was spent on fiber connections, which the fiber connection piece of it costs about $3,000 per connection. That's a whole lot of money. If you look at 70,000 households and $3,000 per connection, federal money aside, it would take us 10 years just to raise the funds to do that, and that's not even counting construction. So how do we solve that piece of it? And I think we got at it a little bit earlier. But how do you solve that piece of the equation?
Well, there are a lot of people talking about fiber, and a lot of people establishing little local. They're called community. What's the community union? The CUDs.
Community
union
CUDs,
districts.
Right. Yep, the CUDs.
What is it? Community union
districts.
Unified districts, union districts.
And having, as I say, having been the first chairman of the VTA and saying with absolute self-confidence that we would have the problem solved in 3 years, you can't blame anybody in any town who has not got adequate coverage for anybody in their town, or a lot of people in their town, whatever their income rate is. They're just pissed. They're let down. They've been told this for 12 years or more, and so when people get that way, they say, well, darn it, if you guys can't do it and the big guys can't do it, we're going to take it into our own hands and we're going to do it ourselves. And they think back on rural electrification, which did that to some extent, and that's what they're trying to emulate. And but it's going to take a long time, not only for the reasons that you were talking about, and hopefully it would be great if we had enough money to just do it, or 2/3 of the money to just do it, which I think we have a chance of doing more than ever before and more than in my lifetime. But there are all this. Every state has got the same kind of plans. So how many cherry pickers are there? How much fiber is there available? And we should be ordering all this stuff now, which is impossible because they don't know the rules for the money yet. The feds have put a deadline on it, yet there's no rules for how you're going to get it. But there needs to be consultants. Everybody who is a well-intended citizen in a CUD, a management group is not an expert at startups, is not necessarily an expert at running a 24-hour-a-day service, is not an expert at getting limbs off trees in the middle of the night, doesn't have a billing system. There's a whole lot to building a new company, as you know. And that's not going to be easy, so they're going to have to outsource that to some management companies. And there's only so many management companies in the country that are big enough to take on anything. So it's going to be a big, heavy lift. And it's not going to happen right now. And that's why we're saying, hey, in an emergency, which is, maybe I can say this because I've had 2 shots in 2 weeks, but maybe some of the emergency is over and maybe we're starting to cross to the other side, but we're still in the recovery stage. And recovery is going to be a couple of years. And so in recovery, did I mention the housing thing to you?
No.
Well, remember when there was Irene, two analogies. When there was Irene, we built the very local people went with their loaders and their trucks and took the
Fix the roads.
And fixed the roads and built makeshift bridges.
Right.
And then they came back in with the federal requirements and the federal dollars and rebuilt them and stuff like that. Well, we're in an emergency. And so people should be hooked up to whatever goes by their house at the best speed that they can possibly get and pay for it. And then we wean them off. We wean ourselves off the federal dollars and put it onto a different system. Same as in housing. When there's an emergency and your house gets wiped away or you're in a pandemic, they take people and put them in hotels or give them vouchers.
Right.
And take care of them. And then they say to the developers, okay, we're going to guarantee you all the loans you need to build your housing development. But part of the deal is going to be that you got to have some low income units in that development. We buy that concept in housing. We buy that concept in other things. This isn't a whole lot different.
Yeah, and we actually had a program too, the temporary broadband assistance program that was funded last year and ran out of funds in January. There was a mechanism that was doing this until a couple months ago. Yeah,
the department. Well, and we're gonna, there's FCC money coming. Well, first there's the American Rescue money. That's the biggest. Then there's whatever the infrastructure thing is going to be. There's still some left over for CARES for communication. There is FCC money coming, and when some of the ISPs mention that they think that this idea of being forced, quote unquote, to have a low income plan is not fair, and they can't afford it in their business plans. Sometimes they can't afford it in their business plans because they need to redo their business plans with all this money built into it and everything. But I think I lost my train of thought for a second. When not me, but when whoever's going to be handling the pass through of the federal money in Mary Evslin's name to the ISP, which probably will be the department or certainly probably some state agency or I don't know who will go through, but we're trying to suggest various ways to do that. But if the FCC is making rumblings saying that they won't give any of the FCC money to any carrier that doesn't have a low income plan. And they may be, and Biden mentioned the other day that every carrier should have a low income plan. So they may be getting it from 2 sides, and that may say to them, hey, I got to do this on many levels. And then the money that gets paid, maybe we use up, again, I'm not going to be there to make the decision, but maybe we use the CARES money first, and when that runs out, the money that's left over from that, then we use the American Rescue money, and then we put the FCC money on. As long as we keep all of that straight and do the proper bookkeeping, the state can decide how they layer all those different federal sources on top of each other.
And it doesn't sound that there's as many restrictions on the American Rescue Plan as there was previously. I knew a few folks in the state who have to keep track of that money, and it's quite involved, but I think they're a little less concerned about the American Rescue Plan because there's not so many restrictions.
That's what I've heard, but it's not out yet. And that's why we're thinking in the past, like the stimulus money, what was it, 4 years ago, the recession, 5 years ago, the recession stimulus money, that communication money went directly from the feds to the carriers, to the providers. This time, I believe it's coming through the state. And so that's why we felt it might be safe to suggest that the state can put the requirement to have a low income plan on the money. Because it's not, that would be, we're hoping that that's a state decision, because we certainly have not enough clout to go back to the feds and they do redo the rules.
Right, right, exactly.
In the next month, please.
Could we talk a little bit, Ben, about the Starlink? That may be more your topic to lead, because I've a little over my pay grade.
Yeah, I think we should talk. We're starting to get a little short on time, so I think we should talk about
I want to understand that.
Technology. And Mary, you said earlier, you know, you envision a solution where we use multiple technologies to solve this problem. What are some of those technologies?
Well, there's the old DSL that's on the old copper fiber. I don't count anymore, because nobody found a way to make that any better.
Now that I understand.
And the road gets busy very easily on that technology. Like if I went, when I was talking about rush hour on the internet. So that one I think is out. Fiber is clearly in, but it's probably the most expensive. It is the most expensive. 4G and 5G, both that the WISP does on the type of radios and transmitters they have, plus AT&T and T-Mobile are going to put it over their traditional mobile phone networks. That's not going to be here right away either, but if we're all working on this with our own piece of it, surely technologies will change by the end of 4 or 5 years. And what we think we were going to use today, like whoever thought there would be a low orbit satellite that would cover the whole world last year. So we don't know what will be available, but I think we have an obligation to try our darndest to guess, and I think that's what it is, not an educated guess. Use technologies that are expandable and that are changeable and not dead end. You know, you never know what's going to be dead end, because somebody has a great idea and all the satellites fall out of the sky on Thursday or something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, nothing is totally safe, but we have an obligation to try to get these people connected, to get everybody, no matter what their salary is, connected with something that has at least an upgrade path and a likelihood of survival. Is that the?
Yeah. So I think most people are probably familiar with what 5G is. You know, most of us have, you know, most people have one of these in their pockets. Understand what 4G, it probably already has 4G. And you've probably heard about 5G and the capabilities of that, or at least have some indication. What is this new generation of satellite technology, and why is it different than like the Dish satellite or the HughesNet satellite that someone may have on the roof right now?
I can give you the layman's explanation for it.
Layman's explanation would be great.
Count me in on that one. Go ahead.
The satellites that have been used by HughesNet and people like that, and I forgot how high they are, but they are very, very high up in orbit. And physics, only, even though it's the speed of light, it still takes a long time to go up there and come back. So you have ship-to-shore radio type overlapping in the communication, simply because of the latency of going all the way up and coming all the way down. You don't notice it so much when you're streaming a movie, because the TV and the receiver have a buffer in it. So they're receiving, you know, like 10 or 20 frames ahead of what you're seeing. And if there's a blip or two in the middle, they have a couple milliseconds to catch up and get the next one and put them closely together for you to view. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So, but nothing's going to change the fact that now I'm zooming in real time and voices in real time going over the internet. And that doesn't work very well with that kind of height that it has to go up and come down. Low orbit satellites, LEOs, are, just as they say, in a lower height. They aren't as high up. And so let me go back to the cell phone network for just a minute. The way the cell phone network is that each time there's a tower that you see, there's sort of a circle around that tower of how far it can transmit to. So I'm moving in my car. I am at the far right extreme of that circle. I get towards the middle of the circle. My phone's still working pretty good. I get to the left side of that circle, and hopefully somebody planted the next tower close enough so, like a Venn diagram, it's overlapping the circle of the first tower, and my call doesn't get dropped. And that I keep going through those circles of cell towers that are perfectly placed and sited. My phone call is wonderful. If they're off in their placement, it either drops the syllable, the sentence, or the call. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yep.
Now we're going to totally flip it with the low orbit satellites. My house is not moving. So my house is sitting still. The satellites are now moving. And I think they're launching something like 60 new ones every 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, and something like 120 to 180 a month, I think.
Yeah, it's like a chain of pearls going around. And there's a transmission sort of circle around each satellite. And hopefully each satellite is placed so that it overlaps like the cell towers do. And they're moving around, not the car moving, but the string of pearls is moving around the Earth and handing that call from one satellite to one satellite to one satellite to one satellite. And I am therefore getting if it all works right, I'm getting no blips in my call. I'm on Starlink right now.
And your signal's pretty clear, at least, as far as our video conference here, and no real discernible delay.
Yeah, well, it does have glitches every once in a while. They say it's in a beta still, which means a test cycle or a test distribution. They're not claiming that it's perfect, and it isn't perfect. So things do still stall every once in a while. But other than that, it's coming down at like 200 millibits a minute, or a second, I guess it is, Mbps. And it's going up at about 20 or 30. When you mentioned before that the state and the federal speed is 25 down, it was 3 up, so you're absolutely right. And that's because all I'm doing when I'm, let's say, downloading a movie or something like that is, as I'm speaking, I'm saying, send me, Lion in Winter. That's all I said, stand up. But a giant movie comes down.
Right.
So there has to be more bandwidth coming down than going up. But nowadays with Zoom, we're sending not just a little message up we're sending real-time voice, and we're sending 25 little pictures of people shaking their heads all the time at the same time.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to up the minimum to more than 2 up, to maybe 3 or 5 up, because the Zoom has changed that. And 525 is pretty much the minimum of doing 2 Zooms or 1 download or 1 kid playing a game and 1 Zoom in a house.
Yeah.
So who is in charge of the traffic up with all the satellites in orbit? I mean, if Starlink is on, if the other 2 guys are jumping in, who's in control up there?
I hope God is.
Thank you for that. Makes me feel good.
I don't know. I'm sure that there's some federal agency that gives them.
I hope so.
Like giving them when you buy the spectrum for sending phone calls or movies like PBS has.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure
I've been around when strings of pearls have broken, so just curious.
Especially offbeat.
Exactly,
my day, exactly.
So Mary, in our last few minutes here, I just want to circle up on this a little bit. So what's your experience? I mean, it seems like it's pretty positive, but what's and you have some of these other I don't know that you have fiber where you are, but you have WISP and you have Starlink, and I don't know what else you have for service, but how do you feel like those technologies compare to each other in terms of speed and reliability?
Well, sometimes if I could incorrectly quote Dr. Fauci, the best pill is the pill you can get, or the best shot is the shot you can get. But wireless wireless doesn't like to go, like WISP wireless doesn't like to go through lots of trees and leaves, and it needs a fairly good straight shot. The satellite, the Starlink satellite needs to have a clear view of the northern sky. So if you live in the middle of the forest, you don't have that unless you want to cut down the trees. Or if you live next to a mountain, you have a view of the sky like a little cone. That's what you're looking for. And you want to make the cone as wide as possible. If it's only very narrow because you live in a valley with 2 granite mountains on either side, that might not be right for you. Cable is adequate, but it tends to be congested more often. It's an older technology. Fiber is currently considered the Cadillac, but it can have a tree fall on it. It can need to have its whatever the equivalent of receivers and radios and pushing the light through the fiber, which is actually glass. We'll need new technology that's on it. So if you're talking about guaranteed quality, I would think at the moment it would probably be fiber. If you're talking about price, it wouldn't be fiber. If you're talking about geography, it might be the satellite, because I'm at the end of the road and there's absolutely nothing here, and I'm on the top of a bald mountain, and that's a pretty good place, and it costs $10,000 or $15,000 to bring the fiber there. So I think go back to like the mixed metaphor of different technologies work better in different situations.
Right. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah, from both the pocketbook and so if you're making policy, you've got to consider all those things: quality of it and longevity of it and cost of it.
Which is what I wanted to end with, which was policy.
So what? Me to set you up for
it. I know. Which is policy. So what should the state be doing to solve this problem?
I think that's above my pay grade.
Well, they're certainly talking about it. I just hope they understand it, because
they do, and I mean, a lot of them understand it a lot, and others in other committees don't have the, don't want to say bandwidth. They don't have the time. They're studying clean water and public health things and stuff like that. It's a lot to understand and to do, and there are lots of people who understand it very well, and they're educating their peers. Our point with the activity that we're involved in now is saying, you guys do the best you can with all that stuff, but don't forget the people, please, and don't forget the people now. Don't say it's okay for low-income people to get it in 5 or 6, to get any communication in 5 or 6 years. And that's the message that
way too long. Way too long.
I can't answer your question of what the state should do. I'll suggest what they can do in the short term.
That's fair.
Yeah. It's to use this money wisely and to understand where to put it, I would think, so we get the return on our investment and get these people connected.
Well, we're hoping to get them connected while the building is going on. We can't wait till the building is done all the way in 4 or 5 years. So
yeah, I agree.
We'll get a big hunk. If the money is allocated, we'll get a big chunk, not all of them, but a big chunk of the people on something affordable and adequate.
So it sounds to me that Tom is very good at looking at the future and looking into the crystal ball, that he does see some positive things here and that we're headed in the right direction.
I sure hope so, because, he uses the analogy of the stimulus money that we got the last time was like pouring water on sand.
Great. Shovel ready. I heard that expression today, shovel ready, at one of the legislative economic development discussions. I said, oh, I remember that phrase.
Yeah, right. Well, it's back.
Yeah, it's back. Well, but this time I think people will understand shovel ready should be shovel ready. So it looks like that's what you're headed towards.
Well, hopefully we've got a shovel ready model ready to hand over to whoever is going to be running this when the legislature passes that money. And I don't believe that it will make that much of a dent in the huge pot of money that the ISPs are getting anyway, and it will do a huge favor to the people. And it's time we stop telling poor people that they're not equal. I mean, equality is supposed to be a real thing nowadays.
Great way to end the show, Mary. Thank you. Thank you for your efforts and for Tom's and for having the vision. We really appreciate your being on the show. Ben, thank you.
working on it. So thank you very much, Pat.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.